Now we are going to talk about the second part of the lecture, kidney, ureter and suprarenal gland. In this lecture we are going to cover the ureter, suprarenal gland and posterior abdominal wall. We have covered kidney in the first lecture. Ureters are muscular tubes 10-inch long. They connect kidney with the posterior surface of the urinary bladder. The urine is propelled forward because of the peristaltic contraction of the muscle wall of the ureter and the filtration pressure which is generated by the glomerulus. These two factors help in propelling the urine forward. The diameter of ureter is approximately 3 mm and along its course at 3 points the diameter of the ureter is little less, and these are called as the constrictions of the ureter. These points are: first point at the junction of the pelvis of the kidney with the ureter. So pelvi-ureteral junction is the first place where the diameter of the ureter is little less. Then at the pelvic brim where it crosses the bifurcation of the common iliac arteries. Then third constriction is present at the level of entry in the bladder wall. Now the course of the ureter in abdomen. As we all know, the ureter begins as the continuation of the renal pelvis at pelvi-ureteral junction. It runs vertically downwards. See, course is almost vertical downwards on psoas major muscle. Psoas major muscle separate the ureter from the parts of the lumbar vertebra, that is the tip of the transverse process of lumbar vertebra. So what lies between the tip of the transverse process of lumbar vertebra and ureter is the psoas major muscle. At pelvic brim, here in this picture we can appreciate, if there is no psoas major here, then the length of the ureter, it always touches the tip of the lumbar vertebra, and then at pelvic brim it is in front of the sacroiliac joint. Here it is not directly in contact with the sacroiliac joint. There are structures present, and between the sacroiliac joint and the ureter over here you will have the bifurcation of the common iliac artery. Now coming to the anterior relations of the ureter. Anterior relations, on both the side it is anteriorly related with the gonadal vessels. So this relation with the gonadal vessels is common on both the side. So anteriorly related with the gonadal vessel on both the side. Now specifically on the right side, anteriorly the initial part of the ureter, the renal pelvis and the initial part of the ureter, it is related with the descending part of the duodenum. Then below this, along this course on the right side only, it will be related anteriorly with the right colic vessels. Here this is the superior mesenteric artery which is going to give branches to the ascending part of the colon, which is the right colic, ileocolic. So the right colic arteries will be related with the anterior part of the anterior surface of the ureter. Then the superior mesenteric artery, which is actually present in the root of the mesentery over here. So this part here, so it is related with the root of the mesentery. So anterior relations on the right side are the second part of the duodenum and the beginning of the second part and termination of the second part and beginning of the third part of the duodenum. Then it is related with the gonadal vessels, then ileocolic vessels, and then the root of the mesentery. Here we can see the descending duodenum, right colic and ileocolic vessels. At pelvic brim, it is crossed by the mesentery and terminal ileum. So here, this is the area where it is lying on the pelvic brim. It is crossed by the mesentery and terminal ileum. On the left side, the ureter will be related with the, apart from this relation over here, this we have already done with the kidney. The ureter will be related with the gonadal vessels of the left side and the left colic vessels, the sigmoid colon, the branches for the sigmoid colon, sigmoidal branches of the inferior mesenteric artery, and then the sigmoid mesocolon. Okay, so from on the left side, the first structure will be related anteriorly is the left gonadal vessels, then left colic vessels, sigmoidal branches of the inferior mesenteric artery, and then the sigmoid mesocolon at the pelvic brim. So these are the anterior relations of the right and left ureter. Posterior relations of ureter. Here in this picture, the ureter is this one. See? And here we can very clearly appreciate that it is lying on the psoas major muscle. This is the psoas major muscle, and within the substance of the psoas major muscle, we can see the exit of the genitofemoral nerve. So the ureter will be related posteriorly with the psoas major muscle and the genitofemoral nerve on both the sides. Blood supply of ureter. Ureter, it develops from the ureteric bud, and ureteric bud follows the course of the ascent of the kidney during development. It's a long tube, so it receives its blood supply from the neighboring arteries. So there are so many arteries supplying the ureter. I will name them. Here one can appreciate this is the renal artery. So there is a branch from the renal artery supplying the ureter. Then branch from the gonadal artery supplying the ureter. Direct from branch from the aorta. Then branch from the common iliac artery. Branch from the internal iliac artery. Branch from the superior vesical artery. Both the vesical artery, superior and inferior vesical artery, can give branch to the ureter. Then there is a branch from the middle rectal artery giving branch to the ureter, vaginal artery giving branch to the ureter, and the inferior vesical artery, uterine artery. So there are so many arteries along the length giving branch to the ureter. And because of this rich blood supply at various segmental level, it is surgically important to take care of these blood vessels while operating in the nearby area. And accidentally, we should not clamp the ureter while performing the procedure. Lymphatic drainage of ureter. There are three sets of lymphatic plexus formed within the wall of the ureter. There is a submucosal plexus, intramural plexus, and adventitial plexus. Lymphatics from the upper part of the ureter, the upper abdominal part of the ureter, drains into the lateral aortic group of lymph nodes. These are the lateral aortic group of lymph nodes. So from upper abdominal portion drains into the lateral aortic group. From lower abdominal part, they can drain into the common iliac group of lymph nodes. From the pelvic part, they drain into the external or internal iliac group of lymph nodes. Then the surface marking of the ureter. If we make a vertical line 5 cm lateral to the lumbar spinous processes which intersect the posterior superior iliac spine, this approximates the position of the ureter. So on the back, if we draw a vertical line 5 cm lateral to the lumbar spinous processes downwards, where it intersects the posterior superior iliac spine, This is the surface marking of the ureter. Now, coming to the nerve supply. Ureter receives fibers from the renal, aortic, superior and inferior superior and inferior hypogastric plexus. Afferent fibers, they travel with the sympathetic nerve and they enter to the 11th thoracic to first lumbar level of the spinal cord and from S2 to S4 segments of the spinal cord. In case of renal colic, there's a strong peristaltic wave get generated in the ureter and that tries to push the stone onwards. And because of the spasm of the smooth muscle, it causes severe pain which is referred to the skin areas which are supplied by these spinal segments. That means segment T11 to L1 and S2 to S4 segments of the spinal cord. So afferents are reaching to these spinal segments. So the pain will be felt along the supply of these spinal nerves. That is in the flank area, loin area and groin area. When there is a lower part of pain in the lower part of the ureter, it is referred to the testis or the tip of the penis and labia majora. Along femoral branch of the genitofemoral nerve, pain may reach up to the front of thigh. So these are the areas where one can feel the referred pain of the renal colic. Okay, so pain is referred from loin to groin. Okay, remember loin to groin. Loin is the lumbar area, groin is the inguinal area, and flank is the side of the back, side of the body. So apart from this, the pain can be referred to the testis, tip of the penis, labia majora, and front of the thigh because of the genitofemoral nerve. Pelvic part of the ureter. We did abdominal part. Now we'll talk about the pelvic part of the ureter. Although we are going to see this in detail when we are doing the pelvic organ, but little bit about the pelvic part of the ureter. In the pelvic cavity, the ureter travels downwards on the lateral pelvic wall. Okay, so it follows the lateral pelvic wall, and when it reaches up to the level of the ischial spine, it turns anteromedially. And then when it is running anteromedially, the course is almost horizontal and it runs towards the bladder, enters into the bladder obliquely in the muscular wall. So this oblique course of the ureter within the muscular wall, it acts as a valve. Because of this, whenever there is a filling of the urinary bladder, pressure increases. The wall of the urinary bladder itself compresses the lumen of the ureter, closes it, and there is no regurgitation of the urine upwards. So it acts as a one-way wall. Another thing is that when it is entering into the urinary bladder in its wall, that's again the narrow point of the ureter. That's the one of the constriction of the ureter where renal stone or the ureteric stone can get stuck or get impacted. So there are three sites from where the renal stone or the ureteric stone get impacted: pelviureteral junction, then at pelvic brim, and this is the third one where stone get impacted very commonly. Now, along the one should remember the course of the ureter, especially the surgeons, because there are so many structures in the pelvis and the surgeries are performed over here, and ureter is related very closely to those structures. In male, the ureter hooks under the vas. In this picture we can appreciate over here, this white, silver white color is this is the vas deferens, and this is the ampulla of the vas deferens. Here the ureter, it hooks under the vas deferens. Okay, so actually the vas it is lying anterior, superior, and then medial to the ureter. This is anterior, then here it is superior and medial to the ureter. So remember, in male, the ureter hooks under the vas deferens. Now in females, ureter passes immediately inferior to the uterine artery near the lateral part of the fornix of the vagina. So after vertical course along the lateral wall of the pelvis, when the ureter is turning forward and medially, then near the lateral part of the fornix of the vagina, it is crossed by the uterine artery. Here in this picture, this half is the female and this half is showing the male pelvis. Here one can appreciate this is the posterior aspect, this is the anterior aspect. The ureter, it is coming, this is crossing the pelvic brim over here, and at the pelvic brim the bifurcation of the common iliac artery is there just posterior to it, and it is running downwards, then anteriorly and medially, and here this is the uterine artery crossing the ureter. It lies anteriorly and superiorly, and then it becomes medial. So it can be remembered as the water under the bridge. So water is actually the urine, bridge is the uterine artery which passes over it. Okay, so remember the position and relation of the ureter and uterine artery. So during hysterectomy, the ureter may accidentally get ligated or damaged or clamped when the uterine artery is ligated. The point at which the uterine artery and the ureter cross, that lies approximately 2 centimeters superior to the ischial spine. So its relation with the ischial spine and the lateral part of the fornix of the vagina should be remembered in relation to the uterine artery. Then ureteric calculus. This we talked when we were in the previous lecture when we were talking about the kidney. I'll repeat this. Ureteric calculus, again the stone, which is the salt of the organic and inorganic material, and when the stone is there in the urinary tract, that is called as the ureteric calculus or the kidney stone. These can obstruct the urinary flow, causing renal colic, which is the acute and severe loin pain, and can lead to hematuria. There are 3 locations where a stone is more likely to become stuck. Okay, this we have discussed. There are 3 areas where the wall or the lumen of the ureter is less as compared to the rest of the area. So they are called as constrictions of the ureter. The first is uretropelvic junction or pelviuretral junction, pelvic brim, and entry in the bladder. Now the gold standard investigation for suspected ureteric calculus is CT scan of the kidney, ureter and bladder, called as CT-KUB. KUB means kidney, ureter and bladder. Apart from these applied aspect, there are congenital defects. There can be double pelvis, that part of pelvis from where the ureter begins, that because of the premature division of the ureteric bud, bifid ureter, megaloureter, or post-cable ureter. These will be further discussed with the embryology classes. So as I've said, the gold standard investigation for suspected ureteric calculus is the CT-KUB, kidney, ureter and bladder. And the ureteric calculi can be observed and removed with a nephroscope, which is an instrument that is inserted through a small incision from the back or the side of the body. And another procedure which is called as lithotripsy, in which the sound waves are given from the back to break the calculus, and it is broken into small pieces and that passes through the urine, and flushed out. Okay. So this is the nephroscope. With the help of this, these stones are broken, which will then small pieces can pass through the ureter, then bladder, and thrown out of the. This is KUV, the shadow of the kidney, then pelvis, ureter, and the bladder can be visualized in this. And with the help of filling defect and the change in the anatomical architecture, we can comment on the pathology of these. After finishing kidney and ureter, in this section we are going to talk about suprarenal glands, also called as adrenals. As the name says, suprarenal glands, they are situated on the upper poles of each kidney, and this gives impression that they have very close relation with the kidney. But actually the fact is that they are more intimately related with the diaphragm. Suprarenal glands, they are golden yellow in color and retroperitoneal like kidneys. They measure about 5 cm in length, 3 cm in width, and 1 cm in thickness, and they weigh approximately 5 grams. At birth, the size of the suprarenal gland is bigger than the adult size. The ratio is 1/3 of the ipsilateral kidney at birth, and in adult, this is 1/20th to 1/30th of the ipsilateral kidney. These adrenals or suprarenal glands are placed in the epigastrium on the upper poles of the kidney in front of the crus of the diaphragm. Now about the capsule and coverings of the suprarenal gland. They are surrounded by perinephric fat and then further enclosed within the renal fascia. And they are separated from the kidney by a small amount of fibrous tissue, and there is thin renal fascia. Kidney can be removed, leaving the gland in place as they are placed in separate subcompartment. So it is easy to remove kidney, leaving the suprarenal gland in place without disturbing the gland. Kidneys can be removed. Now we saw the normal placement of the gland. So it is possible that some of the ectopic suprarenal tissue can be found in the areolar tissue near the suprarenal glands, adjacent to the kidney, the spermatic cord, epididymis and testis in male. They can be found in ovary and broad ligament of the uterus in females, and they can be cause of wrong diagnosis. And sometimes the neoplastic tumors can arise from these ectopic adrenal tissue. And if we are performing a surgical resection of the adrenal gland, it is necessary to access the ectopic tissue. So with the gland, the ectopic tissue should also be removed. Now coming to the parts of the gland. Right suprarenal gland has, as I've said, this is roughly pyramidal in shape. So it has apex. There is a base, two surfaces. This is anterior surface and the opposite one will be the posterior surface, and two borders, the medial border which is convex and the lateral border. This is on the right side. On the left side there are two poles. This is semilunar in shape. So this is the upper pole. This one is lower pole. Anterior surface, opposite is the posterior surface. There is a medial border, convex, and the lateral border. Now some features about of this right and left suprarenal gland. The right one is pyramidal and it is flat anteroposteriorly. This is the anterior surface of the right suprarenal, anterior surface of the left suprarenal. How they are different from each other? First look at the shape of the gland. This one is pyramidal, this one is semilunar in shape. Both of them are flat anteroposteriorly and they lie on the anterior superior part of the upper pole of the kidney. This is the part which will be related with the right kidney. This is the part for the left side. This is the part which will be related with the left kidney. For side determination, one should remember that on the anterior surface, there is a hilum which is placed more towards the upper pole, whereas on the left side, the hilum is towards the lower pole. And when we see the posterior surface, these are the two posterior surface. This one is for the right side, this one is for the left side. So left posterior surface has this almost vertical ridge separating the two areas. So lateral area will be related with the diaphragm, the medial will be related with the kidney. Whereas on the right side, there is a transverse ridge which is separating this concavity for the kidney with this flat area for the diaphragm. So with this, we can identify the side of the adrenal glands. Coming to the relations of the gland, here again the anterior aspect of right and the left suprarenal, here posterior aspect of the right and left suprarenal. We'll begin with the posterior relations because in this picture, the central picture over here, posteriorly both the suprarenal glands, they will be related with the crus of the diaphragm of the respective side. So right kidney will be related with the right crus of the diaphragm posteriorly over here. Left kidney will be related with the left crus of the diaphragm over here. So both the crus of the diaphragm, we can just see over here, posterior to these structures, here will be the left crus of the diaphragm, here will be the right crus of the diaphragm. Okay, so that is the posterior relation. Now anterior relations of the left kidney first. For this, it is left suprarenal gland. So anterior relations of the left suprarenal gland, it is related with the cardiac end of the stomach. So here this is actually the peritoneal relation because the stomach is going to be separated from the part of the lesser sac. So between the suprarenal and the stomach, there is a recess of the lesser sac will be there. So this is peritoneal relation. Below that, here we can see this is the pancreas, and we know that along the upper border of the pancreas, splenic arteries running like this. This is the celiac trunk. So here is the splenic artery which is reaching up to the hilum of the spleen like this. So tail of the pancreas and the splenic artery, they are reaching up to the hilum of the spleen. So the upper part related with the cardiac end of the stomach, and below that splenic artery and the pancreas will be related. So I'll make relation with the stomach over here. This part I've said will be related with the stomach like this. Then on the right side medially, as we can see here in this, the inferior vena cava, it is medially related with the suprarenal gland of the right side. Most of the anterior surface is behind the inferior vena cava in this. So medially it is related with the inferior vena cava, and laterally it is going to be related with the right lobe of liver in the upper part. That area is bare area, but in the lower part there is a peritoneal relation because the uppermost part of the hepatorenal pouch will be related over here. The peritoneum from the kidney, which is on the anterior surface, or you can say from the liver, it reflects back onto the kidney over here, making the hepatorenal pouch. So lower lateral area will be related with the upper recess, the hepatorenal pouch. So here it will be related with the bare area of liver, and then the upper recess of the hepatorenal pouch, like this. Okay, so this was about the anterior and posterior relations of the suprarenal gland. Coming to the relations, medial and lateral. Medial relations are with the, this is aorta, this is inferior vena cava. If you cut inferior vena cava, what we can see is the right crus of the diaphragm over here. Here in aorta, this is the origin of celiac trunk. This one is superior mesenteric artery. These are renal arteries. So the celiac trunk over here, above that, these are the this position is for the celiac ganglion, right and left. So on the right side, the right border of the right suprarenal gland is related with the right celiac ganglion. Then it is also related with the right inferior phrenic artery. Appreciate over here. See carefully. This is the right inferior phrenic artery. Inferior phrenic artery, they are paired branches from the aorta, and they give rise to the arteries supplying the suprarenal gland. Okay, so they are related with the right celiac ganglion, right inferior phrenic artery. Then cisterna chyli. Cisterna chyli will be placed posterior to the right crus of the diaphragm, just on the right side of the aorta. So cisterna chyli will be related. Then the medial edge of the abdominal aorta will also be related. Celiac trunk will also make relation with the medial border of the right suprarenal gland. Lateral border, as we have seen in most of the relation over here, it is going to be related with the liver. Now coming to the medial and lateral relations of the left suprarenal gland. This is semilunar in shape, so this is the medial convex border over here. It will be related with the left celiac trunk over here. Then it will be related with the left inferior phrenic artery. So along this border, this artery which is running over here is the left inferior phrenic artery. Then there is a branch from the celiac trunk which runs along, goes upwards and then runs along the lesser curvature of the stomach. Left gastric artery will also come in medial relation of the left suprarenal gland. Whereas the lateral border will be related with the left kidney. Here, this is the medial border. So this is the lateral border. Will be related with the left kidney. Arterial supply of the suprarenal gland. As we know, these suprarenal glands or adrenal glands, they produce variety of systemically important hormones. They require huge blood supply and they should be very well vascularized. The suprarenal glands, actually they are one of the highest arterial flow rate per gram of the tissue. It is up to 5 milliliter per gram per minute. So they are highly vascularized, and the blood supply is controlled by the neuroendocrine and the paracrine system or mechanisms, which is one of the most important method of regulating the systemic levels of the adrenal hormones. So for this rich blood supply, there are 3 sets of arteries arising from different sources. I'll list them. Superior suprarenal arteries. Superior suprarenal arteries, in this picture we can see the superior suprarenal artery. There are many small arteries entering into the suprarenal gland coming from the inferior phrenic artery, the right side, and the left side. This inferior phrenic artery, they are the paired branches from the aorta. They give 3 to 4 sets of suprarenal arteries. The inferior phrenic artery will give rise to suprarenal artery superior set. Then another set of arteries, the pair of middle suprarenal artery arising from directly from the aorta. They can be single or few middle suprarenal arteries can be there. Then there is a inferior suprarenal artery. This arises from the renal arteries. So superior suprarenal arteries, they are branches of the inferior phrenic arteries, middle one from the aorta and the inferior one from the renal veins, renal arteries. Coming to the venous drainage. Like there were three sets of arteries for arterial supply, venous drainage is by the single veins from both the suprarenal gland. So there is one for the right side, right suprarenal vein, one for the left side, left suprarenal vein. Right side suprarenal vein you can identify over here. As I've said, when we were talking about the features, it is close to the upper pole. The hilum is close to the upper pole. From there, the vein will drain into the inferior vena cava directly. Whereas the hilum of the left suprarenal is close to the lower side and it drains into the left renal vein. See, this has little longer length, whereas the right one is very small. The venous drainage of each gland is usually through the single vein, and that is why the infarction of the gland is more likely to be caused by the damage to the suprarenal vein than to one of the renal arteries. Then one more feature we have noted, the right suprarenal vein is small or shorter in length, which makes surgical resection of the gland or mobilization of the inferior vena cava very difficult or dangerous. It may be inadvertently averse from the inferior vena cava during surgery. That means it can get damaged and move away from the inferior vena cava during surgeries. Then the variations are possible in the venous drainage of the suprarenal gland, and one should anticipate the variant suprarenal venous anatomy so that we can minimize the bleeding during laparoscopic adrenalectomy in patients with the large tumor or in pheochromocytomas. So remember, two pair of renal veins. The right one is going to drain directly into the inferior vena cava, whereas left one is going to drain into the left renal vein. Lymphatic drainage. Mostly the lymphatic channels, they are going to drain into the lateral aortic group of lymph nodes, which are also called as the para-aortic and para-caval group of lymph nodes. About the nerve supply, these adrenals or the suprarenal glands, they have one of the richest autonomic innervation, and the sympathetic innervation, it comes from the celiac plexus, conveying fibers from the 8th thoracic and first lumbar segment, from 8th thoracic to first lumbar segment. Whereas these preganglionic fibers, they are sympathetic fibers, preganglionic sympathetic fibers, pierce the cortex and make synaptic connection with the chromaffin cells, which acts as a postganglionic fibers. Now, the next topic is posterior abdominal wall, and this will be the last topic of the posterior abdominal wall. This is the wall which is covering the abdomen from the posterior aspect. posterior abdominal wall. See, this whole wall which is on the posterior aspect of the abdomen is called as the posterior abdominal wall. Posterior abdominal wall is going to be continuous superiorly with the superior thoracic wall at the posterior attachment of the diaphragm. See, this is the posterior attachment of diaphragm in the form of lateral arcuate ligament, medial arcuate ligament. So from here it is going to be continuous with the posterior thoracic wall. Inferiorly, this posterior abdominal wall, it is continuous with the posterior wall of the pelvis. Here it is going to be continuous with the pelvis. This is pelvic cavity. So below it is going to be continuous with the pelvic cavity. Then laterally it is continuous. This is the cut edge of the anterolateral abdominal wall. So it is continuous with the anterolateral abdominal wall. And it is composed of several layers. Like there were layers in the anterior abdominal wall, similar layers are there in the posterior abdominal wall also. Skin, superficial fascia, there is a layer of muscles, and then extraperitoneal fat and fascia, and the parietal peritoneum. Now, the posterior abdominal wall, it is mainly composed of these following structures. 5 lumbar vertebrae and their associated intervertebral disc in the midline. Posterior abdominal wall muscles, including the psoas muscles, quadratus lumborum muscle, iliacus, and part of the transversus abdominis. I am saying part because just the posterior most part of the transverse abdominis contribute for it. And oblique muscles, the part of the transversus and oblique muscles, which are actually the muscles of the anterolateral abdominal wall. Then diaphragm, the part of the diaphragm which is contributing in the superior part of the posterior abdominal wall. Then in fascia, the thoracolumbar fascia, there is psoas and iliac fossa, fascia covering the iliac fossa also, the lumbar plexus. Then apart from that, fat, nerves, vessels, and the lymph nodes of the posterior abdominal wall. Now, first we'll talk about the fascia of the posterior abdominal wall. In general, the fascia which is covering the posterior abdominal wall is called as endo-abdominal fascia between the parietal peritoneum and the muscles. This fascia lies between the parietal peritoneum and the muscles. Then there is a term called as psoas fascia. The name is suggesting this is the fascia which is covering the surface of the anterior surface of the psoas major muscle, also called as psoas sheath. Thickened superior part of this psoas fascia is called as the medial arcuate ligament. We all know that medial arcuate ligament also give attachment to the diaphragm, muscles of the diaphragm in the superior part. So the thickened upper portion of the psoas fascia is called as medial arcuate ligament. Whereas when we trace it medially, it is attached to the lumbar vertebrae and to the pelvic brim. So psoas fascia medially attached to the lumbar vertebrae and pelvic brim. Psoas fascia fuses laterally with the quadratus lumborum fascia, and the fascia which we named previously is thoracolumbar fascia. We'll talk about this in detail in the next 5 minutes. Then the iliac fascia. This is inferior to the iliac crest, and this is fascia covering the iliacus muscle. Then thoracolumbar fascia, which is actually a little complex fascia that attached to the vertebral column medially. Okay. Now about the thoracolumbar fascia. In the lumbar region, this is extensive fascia. It is also extending into the posterior part of the thoracic wall. But we'll talk about the arrangement of the fascia in the lumbar region. In lumbar region, it has 3 layers. We'll begin from the posterior layer. This is the cross section. We have seen this picture when we were doing the coverings around kidney. So this is the same picture I'm using. This is the cut section of the body of the vertebra. This part of the transverse process is visible, and this is the spine. Okay. So the posterior layer of the thoracolumbar fascia is attached to the tip of the spines. Okay. Tip of the spine gives attachment to the posterior layer. Now when you trace posterior layer, go laterally, the posterior layer is laminated. There are two laminae. One lamina, superficial lamina, is going to be continuous with the aponeurosis of the latissimus dorsi muscle. This muscle is latissimus dorsi muscle. So it is going to be continuous with the aponeurosis of the latissimus dorsi muscle. Whereas the deeper lamina is going to cover the surface of the muscle which are present between the spine and the transverse process. These muscles are also called as paraspinal muscles. They are actually the deep muscles of the back called as paraspinal muscles. So deeper lamina is going to cover the enclose the paraspinal muscles. Then this fascia over here, see, which is extending from the tip of the transverse process laterally. This is actually the middle layer of the thoracolumbar fascia. So we talked about the posterior superficial layer, posterior deeper layer. Then now about the middle layer of the thoracolumbar fascia. It is attached medially to the tip of the transverse process of the lumbar vertebrae. Extends laterally. See, this muscle is quadratus lumborum muscle. So it is extending behind or posterior to the quadratus lumborum muscle laterally. Okay, so it is behind the quadratus lumborum muscle. When we trace this fascia inferiorly, it gets attached to the iliac crest, and superiorly, if you are tracing it, it is attached to the lower border of the 12th rib. So inferior attachment is on the iliac crest, superior is on the lower border of the 12th rib. So posterior layer, middle layer, we'll see the anterior layer in the next slide. Anterior layer of thoracolumbar fascia. Here again I have marked the muscles. Psoas major muscle over here, quadratus lumborum muscle here, latissimus dorsi, these are paraspinal muscles. So this anterior layer is attached to the anterior surface of the transverse process. Middle layer was on the tip of the transverse process. See over here, middle layer over here. Anterior layer at the almost at the middle of the transverse process, anterior surface of the lumbar vertebrae. Medial to this attachment will get the attachment of the psoas major muscle, and lateral to it is attachment of the quadratus lumborum muscle. And laterally this anterior layer fuses with the fascia transversalis and the aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis muscle. So when we trace it laterally, it fuses with the fascia transversalis and aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis muscle. Superiorly, it is attached to the inferior border of the 12th rib and the transverse process of the first lumbar vertebra, forming the lateral arcuate ligament. At the anterior layer of the thoracolumbar fascia, which is covering the anterior surface of the quadratus lumborum, forms the lateral arcuate ligament superiorly. Inferiorly, it is attached to the iliolumbar ligament and adjoining crest area. See over here, this is the quadratus lumborum. So anterior layer is going to cover this. So superiorly, it is thickened over here and forms the lateral arcuate ligament. Inferiorly, attached to the iliolumbar ligament, which will be more medial behind the psoas major muscle and the adjoining iliac crest. This is iliac crest in the lateral part, and iliolumbar ligament will be medial behind the psoas major muscle. Okay, so this was about the orientation of thoracolumbar fascia. Now coming to the muscles of the posterior abdominal wall. Here, see the posterior abdominal wall made up of these three muscles. This is psoas major muscle. Over this, there is a small muscle which is psoas minor. Then quadratus lumborum muscle and iliacus muscle. Quadratus lumborum muscle See over here, it is very clearly seen. And lateral to that, this muscle is the transversus abdominis muscle. So this is the posterior most aponeurotic part of the transversus abdominis muscle. So all these together will make the muscles of the posterior abdominal wall. Let's see each one by one. Psoas major muscle. We are now familiar with this section. This is the transverse section. So to show the attachment of the psoas major muscle, I have shown you the location. It is present in the medialmost part of the posterior abdominal wall on each side of the vertebral column, the lumbar part. This muscle originates from the sides of the body of the vertebra. Okay, so this attachment, here you can appreciate that this will be the body of vertebra. So sides of the body of vertebra from 12th thoracic to 5th lumbar vertebra. Then on the transverse process, this is the part which is attached to the transverse process of the lumbar vertebrae. So all lumbar vertebrae, transverse process gives attachment to the anterior surface, gives attachment to the psoas major muscle. Then, so this will be the attachment somewhere here on the body and the transverse process. Below that, the intervening intervertebral disc. These gray areas actually, they are intervertebral disc. So it also takes origin from the intervertebral disc. So there is one set of origin over here, another set of origin over here. So the origin attachment is actually jumping. So one set of fibers attached here, then another set of fibers attached here. So there is a gap. The origin is not continuous. But here there is a tendinous ring, which is again giving fibers to the attachment to the fibers of the psoas major muscle. So attachments are the sides of the bodies of the 12th thoracic to 5th lumbar vertebra. Okay, so bodies of the adjoining vertebra and their intervertebral disc. That means the lower part of the 12th thoracic vertebra, upper part of the 1st lumbar vertebra, and the disc between the two. This is one attachment. Then there is a tendinous arch over here. Then the next attachment between the L1, L2 and intervertebral disc. That is the second. Then there is a tendinous arch. Then this attachment, the tendinous arch. It's like this. And through this gap, these lumbar arteries are passing backwards. See over here and laterally. So this is the attachment of the psoas major muscle. Insertion of psoas major, it is attached to the lesser trochanter of femur by a strong tendon. See, this muscle is extending, coming from all the way from the abdomen, crossing this false pelvis area and reaching up to the lesser trochanter over here. See, so by the help of strong tendon, it is attached to the lesser trochanter, and usually at the attachment, it is accompanied by another muscle called as iliacus. Nerve supply of this muscle is the anterior rami of lumbar nerves, mainly first lumbar and second lumbar, sometimes third lumbar also contribute to the supply. Action of this muscle, usually it acts along with the iliacus muscle, and both of them together cause flexion at the hip joint because they are going to cross the hip joint from anterior aspect. So their action is the flexion of hip joint. When they are acting superiorly, that means the lower attachment is fixed and the muscle is moving from the upper part, then it causes flexion of the vertebral column. When the lower attachment is fixed, then it causes flexion of the vertebral column. Laterally, when only one side of the muscle is acting, it causes laterally, it is used to balance the trunk. During sitting, it acts from the inferior aspect with the iliacus and cause flexion of the trunk. This muscle descends along the pelvic brim, continues like see over here, descending along the pelvic brim. This is the pelvic brim, continues towards the lower limb behind the inguinal ligament. See, this is the inguinal ligament. It passes posterior to the inguinal ligament and lies anterior to the capsule of the hip joint. This will be the hip joint, so the muscle is anterior to it. So it is anterior to the capsule of hip joint and converge to form a tendon that receives some fibers of the iliacus also. This is the iliacus muscle. See, this is the iliacus muscle. So it receives some fibers of the iliacus also and get attached to the lesser trochanter. So this was the psoas major muscle. Quadratus lumborum. It's the muscle which is actually most of the part of the quadratus lumborum is behind the psoas major muscle. Here I have removed the psoas major muscle. So what we can see here is the quadratus lumborum, the medial half of the inferior borders of the 12th rib. Okay, so this would be the 12th rib over here. So the inferior border, medial half of the 12th rib gives attachment to the quadratus lumborum. Then tips of the transverse processes of the 4 lumbar vertebrae, upper 4. Okay, see over here, these are the bodies of the vertebra. So ये जो दिखा रहा है ना यहाँ पे, ये सारे processes जो दिख रहे हैं, these are transverse process. ये पहला lumbar process हो गया, ठीक है. So the tips of the transverse processes of the upper 4 lumbar vertebrae will give attachment over here. So it is attached to the inferior border of 12th rib and to all these transverse processes on the tip. Then insertion, naturally ये upper one is the origin, तो नीचे क्या होना चाहिए, ये insertion होगा. तो ये insertion के लिए क्या बोना है, this is iliac crest. So it is attached to the iliac crest, but थोड़ा सा medial portion is attached to the iliolumbar ligament. This is the ligament which is extending between the lumbar vertebrae, तो उसका transverse process से लेके iliac crest की inner lip तक posteriorly. So this ligament extends from the transverse process to the inner lip of the posterior part of iliac crest. So that iliolumbar ligament will give attachment to the give lower attachment to the quadratus lumborum muscle. Then nerve supply. It is supplied by the anterior primary rami of the 12th and first 4 lumbar nerves. That means सिर्फ आखिरी वाला, पीछे L5 छोड़ दीजिए. T12 से लेके L1, L2, L3, L4 सबकी primary rami will supply the quadratus lumborum. Then the action. This muscle is extending from iliac crest to 12th rib. So most important action of the quadratus lumborum is it's a muscle of inspiration. When it contracts, it causes fixation of the 12th rib. 12th rib also gives attachment to the diaphragm above. So when the 12th rib is fixed, in that case, the diaphragm can descend, making this as the base, the fixed point. Diaphragm can descend down effectively in inspiration. So it fixes 12th rib during inspiration. So it is considered as muscle of inspiration. When the pelvis is fixed, then when it is acting bilaterally, that means muscle of both the side, together they can cause extension of the vertebral column. Naturally lower attachment यहाँ fix हो गया, तो ऊपर से काम कर रहा है. So they will cause extension of the vertebral column. When it is acting unilaterally, they cause lateral flexion of the vertebral column. So this was quadratus lumborum muscle. Iliacus muscle. This is the muscle here which is placed lateral to the psoas major muscle and inferior to the quadratus lumborum muscle. So actually see over here, this is psoas major. When it is removed, this is the picture you can see. Superiorly this is quadratus lumborum, inferiorly this is iliacus. ये जो bony point दिख रहा है, bony marking दिख रही है, this is iliac crest. And over this, the surface of the quadratus lumborum and iliacus, you'll see all these nerves, they are branches from the lumbar plexus. Okay, so about the iliacus muscle, naturally this is, as the name is suggesting, it is in the iliac fossa. So superior 2/3 of the iliac fossa. You have done hip bone, you know what is iliac fossa. So superior 2/3 of the iliac fossa gives attachment to the iliacus muscle. Then apart from this is sacrum. Okay, so this will be the promontory. Sides of this called as the ala of the sacrum. So anterior surface of the ala of the sacrum also gives attachment to the iliacus. The same time, here is the joint, sacroiliac joint. So there are anterior sacroiliac ligaments on both the sides. So their surface also gives attachment to the iliacus. So from superior 2/3 of the iliac fossa, from ala of sacrum and sacroiliac ligament, anterior one. Okay. Then, as I have told you, insertion is along with the tendon of psoas major. They are inserted on the lesser trochanter, and small portion of the shaft just below it. So on the lesser trochanter and part of the shaft just below it. Some fibers, they are also attached to the psoas major tendon. Nerve supply of iliacus is from the femoral nerve. Okay. Action, as it is usually acts with the psoas major and cause flexion of the thigh as well as stabilizes the hip joint. Psoas minor muscle. It may or may not present. Proximally, it's a small muscle placed on the anterior surface of the psoas major muscle. Originates from the bodies of the 12th and the first lumbar vertebrae, 12th thoracic and first lumbar vertebrae, and the intervening disc. So from here it will take origin. It's small, slender muscle over the surface of the psoas major, and then this muscle, it doesn't cross the hip joint. It just ends at the pectineal line and the iliopectineal eminence. Remember, this muscle will not cross the hip joint. Action is, it balances the trunk with psoas major muscle. So it is just helping the psoas major muscle in balancing the trunk. Innervation is from the anterior lamina of the lumbar nerves, first and second lumbar nerve. Coming to the lumbar plexus. Lumbar plexus is embedded in the substance of the psoas major muscle. Although the nerve is a little posteriorly when it is close to the midline, towards the vertebral column, but when they are moving laterally and downwards, they are in the substance of the psoas major muscle. And the lumbar plexus made up of anterior rami of the first lumbar to fourth lumbar nerves. Okay, actually the main contribution is from the first lumbar, second lumbar and third lumbar nerve. There is a small contribution that comes from the 12th thoracic nerve, and there is a superior branch of the fourth lumbar which also contributes to the lumbar plexus. The arrangement of the nerve fibers, it is not similar as the brachial plexus which we have seen in the upper limb. There is no clear-cut anterior and posterior divisions, but still the first, second and third lumbar nerves, they have dorsal and ventral division. And this lumbar plexus, it is usually, it meant for supplying the musculature of the lower limb and of the lower limb. Let's see lumbar plexus in detail. Lumbar plexus here. So these are the spinal nerves which are coming out of the intervertebral foramen, which I have shown you in the previous picture. So these are the ventral primary rami of the lumbar nerves L1, 2, 3, a branch from the fourth, and a branch from the 12th thoracic spinal nerve also. So main contribution is from the first, second and third. There is a branch contributing from the fourth and branch contributing from the 12th thoracic nerve. The branches of the lumbar nerve, first we'll talk the bigger major nerves which are getting formed by the lumbar plexus. First is the femoral nerve. See, this is the femoral nerve which is formed by the union of dorsal divisions of the lumbar nerves, second, third and fourth lumbar nerve. Okay. Second to fourth dorsal division will form the femoral nerve, whereas second to fourth ventral division will form the obturator nerve. See, this is the obturator, contribution from the fourth, contribution from the third, contribution from the second. So this will form the obturator nerve. Okay. Then lumbosacral trunk. What is lumbosacral trunk? There is a major contribution or major branch of the fourth lumbar nerve along with the ventral ramus of the fifth lumbar. This is called as lumbosacral trunk. This will enter into the pelvis and contribute in the formation of the sacral plexus, which is present in the pelvis and supplying the pelvic structures. So these are the major nerves. There is another nerve which is present only in 10% of the cases, called as accessory obturator nerve. So in that there is a contribution from the third lumbar and fourth lumbar. See over here, this thin nerve, this is accessory obturator nerve coming from the third and fourth, and it may or may not present. This is accessory obturator nerve. Now other smaller branches of the lumbar plexus are ilioinguinal nerve and iliohypogastric nerve. See over here, this is the first lumbar nerve. The first lumbar, these are the iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerve. They supply the abdominal muscles and skin of the inguinal region and the pelvic region. These muscles, they just cross the posterior aspect, come anteriorly and laterally, and they supply the abdominal muscles, which is the motor supply, and skin of the inguinal and the pubic region. Then there is a nerve which is called as genitofemoral nerve, getting contribution from the first lumbar and the second lumbar nerve. This nerve passes through the substance of the psoas major, and almost at the middle of the psoas major it comes onto the surface. Then it divides into, as the name is suggesting, femoral and genital branch. Femoral branch, it follows, it lies little lateral to the external iliac artery, enters into the lower limb, deep to the inguinal ligament, and supply the area of the femoral triangle, the skin over the femoral triangle. Whereas genital branch, it enters into the deep inguinal ring and supply the skin of the scrotum and cremastric muscle. So that's genitofemoral nerve. Root value is L1, L2. Now the next nerve is lateral cutaneous nerve of thigh. It is contributed by the second and third lumbar ventral rami. It supplies the skin on the anterolateral surface of the thigh. Now this picture again. So all these are the primary ventral rami emerging out from the intervertebral foramen. Now just identify the major nerve. This is femoral nerve. This one is the obturator nerve. This one is obturator. Okay. This one is femoral. This one is obturator. And this, the medial most nerve, is lumbosacral trunk. Now see over here, in this area, the femoral nerve, obturator nerve and the lumbosacral trunk. All of these three nerves, they have important relationship with the transverse process of the fifth lumbar vertebra. So if there is damage or any deformity in the fifth lumbar vertebra transverse process can cause damage to these three nerves which lie in close proximity to the fifth lumbar transverse process. Now, what is positive psoas sign? This aspect actually we did in kidney also, when I was talking about the infected kidney and the coverings, and there is a collection of the infected pus around the kidney. In that case, the fascia covering the psoas and the quadratus lumborum and the iliac fascia, they may get inflamed. And in that case, here the picture, in this picture, the inflamed appendix is shown lying on the iliac fascia and the psoas fascia over here. So when these, because the iliopsoas muscle, it's a long muscle, the psoas major has long cords coming from the abdomen, crossing the greater pelvis and then reaching into the lower limb. So this long course of the muscle, uh, it has clinically important relationship with many viscera like kidney, ureter, cecum, appendix, sigmoid colon, pancreas, lymph nodes, nerves of the posterior abdominal wall. All these structures, they are closely related with the iliopsoas muscle. So whenever there is inflammation in these viscera, that is definitely going to affect or inflame the fascia and the muscle over here. In that case, when the fascia of the iliopsoas get stretched, that means normal the function of the iliopsoas muscle is flexion of the hip joint. But if we stretch it, then if we perform extension of the hip joint, because the stretching of the fascia of the iliopsoas muscle, there is a pain felt by the patient. So this elicitation of pain with this maneuver is called as positive sign. Now coming to the another clinical aspect, which is called as psoas abscess. The tubercular infection of the vertebrae during childhood is very common. Okay, so whenever the tuberculosis of the vertebral bodies have happened, in that case, the abscess which is formed, it can trickle down into the deep to the fascia of the psoas muscle, and it can get collected in the form of psoas abscess. Psoas fascia, in that case, it reacts and thickened to form a strong stocking like tube. So psoas fascia is thickened because of it's in reaction to the psoas abscess, which is usually between the muscle and the fascia, and pus passes inferiorly. So it pus just follows the course of the fascia and trickles down inferiorly along the psoas muscle surface, and it can reach up to the thigh because the muscle is attached on the lesser trochanter. So the abscess can trickle down as up to the thigh, upper part of the thigh, and this is called as psoas abscess. See in this picture, it is shown with the red arrow. The psoas major muscle is over here, and the fascia is lifted anteriorly because of the collection of the pus in this area. Pus can also reach the psoas fascia from the posterior mediastinum when the thoracic vertebrae are diseased. So this was all about the posterior abdominal wall, and in this we talked about the muscles of the posterior abdominal wall, fascia of the posterior abdominal wall. We talked in detail about the thoracolumbar fascia, and then we talked about the lumbar plexus in detail and its applied anatomy. So thank you so much for today, for your patient listening.